We get comments about people who are lonely, who are walking by themselves, who, who left a fellowship and they're like, man, I don't go to this church anymore. And, I don't have anybody. And it's just like, it's the oddest thing to me.
Right.
That a Christian would say because they left a church that they don't have anybody.
Right.
You understand? Like because they left a fellowship community, they don't have anybody.
Right.
So all of my relationships were built around
you being in this
this
environment. Yeah.
That is a sin before God.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Welcome to the Church Dropout podcast. My name is Alan. I'm joined by
Lisa.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Church Dropout. Church Dropout is a podcast. We talk about issues, topics, and teachings related to faith, life, and culture in ways that are sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always insightful. If you have not already, please like, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast at. So today, what I want to talk about is something that we've experienced multiple times as we've had fellowship with certain communities and left for various reasons. Some positive, some not positive. But in those communities, we formed deep relationships, right? And, or at least what appeared to be deep relationships with people to the point where, you're calling each other names, not like...
Not bad names, but I get it.
Like, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, just
Uncle,
like...
stuff like that.
Yes.
And...
sister.
Yeah, yeah. And, or even your kids, right? And... unfortunately, when we left those communities, unfortunately, some friendships left with it, right? And so, when we leave church, we leave friendships as well. And I want to talk about that a little bit, right? Like just why that happens. Why when you leave a church, oftentimes do you leave friendships? Why does it have to be that way? You know what I mean? And so I want to talk about that a little bit. But first, let me give a little bit of a disclaimer, I guess, just, for humility purposes. And is that, I'm sure there are things that we could have done better, done differently in a lot of those situations with a lot of those relationships as well. So I'm not just putting this out to those individuals, but, I'm not just saying like, it's everyone else's fault.
Right.
However, I do think it's very common that when people leave fellowships, especially when they leave because they feel like God is calling them out or they're called to do something different or they're just walking away from that particular community, that those friendships that appear to be deep don't often follow with them. So from your perspective, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think friendships stop when you leave a church?
I think because those friendships are based off of your commonality of church. Yeah. You're always at church. You're always doing things together at church. You know what I mean? And it's weird to me because I have, throughout my life with jobs and working in different places, I'm still in connection with those friends that either I left the job or they left the job. You know what I mean? I'm still in contact with those. Like, I feel like those are real relationships. You know what I mean? And now our relationship is just a little bit different, but now it's our relationship isn't based off of just work. It's based off of our connection, Yeah. And I feel like with church, it's not like that. It's like, once you're no longer a part of this, group, you're like on the outside, and at the same time, it kind of opened my eyes from, the several different, churches that we've had to, either leave or, we're called somewhere else that, or I'm sorry, not us leaving, but other people leaving, it just opened my eyes to, how they may have felt, and how did I treat them? Was I staying in contact with them,
I'm sure I'm guilty
and
of that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And there are some relationships, that, they probably left, they were hurt from church or something like that. And I was never made to feel like I had to choose between either having a relationship with them or, continuing with this church, Yeah. So, I don't know. I just feel like, we need to pay attention to these relationships. We can have relationships with neighbors, we can have relationships with anywhere else, but when it comes to church, if you're no longer a part of that church, our relationship is, and granted, there are some relationships that, I still have, you know
Absolutely.
what I mean? With, but it's not,
it's not the same.
it's not the same, but it's not even the close to the amount of relationships that I had when I was in the church.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think it's interesting because I find it, and this is maybe a separate topic, but I find it a little bit easier to have friends who are not Christian than to have friends that are Christian. And and I think this plays into it. I think sometimes there is these, I don't know, expectations that come with being friends with Christians that make it harder to maintain relationship than it is for people who don't, have that, those, expectations.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think
right.
a lot of that has to do with, again, church culture, in terms of a lot of these relationships are built around what we do on Sunday or throughout the week and different things of that sort. But yeah, I agree with you. It's just an interesting phenomenon. And I know our experience may be a little bit different than most people's experience. I think this happens at all levels. I think it happens with lay folks. I think it happens with just people in general. But I know for me, because I was in leadership, I don't know if that made it worse, but it definitely played a huge part in why those relationships weren't able to thrive, and a lot of that just had to do with, for me, just not being able to be me because of their attachment still to that particular community. So it just showed me that the relationship was based on the church, not necessarily based on our relationship, with one another.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then the other part is that it's hard. It's hard to maintain relationships when your relationships are built on the church, because what the church requires of you to be there every time the door is open, it's almost impossible for you to maintain any relationships outside of that community.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so for me, I know a lot of people that I would love to hang out with, they simply probably don't even have the time to engage in other relationships because all of their relational energy is being poured into that quote unquote church. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So their bandwidth is when I have time, I need to be with family. The rest of the time I'm serving the community.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because these are where my deep relationships are, but because this is where I fellowship and reside. And it just puts a strain. And the last thing I'll say is loyalty. I think that people feel, at least in our lives, it made it difficult because people felt like they had to choose between us and the community. At least that's the way it felt to me, where it was like, we're not going there anymore.
Yeah.
We may not feel the same way about the things anymore.
Right.
And so they got to kind of make a choice, and so, yeah, I just think it's interesting because we're the ones who are supposed to understand how to maintain friendships without expectation, without the barriers that come with maintaining relationships in the world, right? Our whole Christian faith is based on, the love of God loving us and forgiveness, right? Or, us being imperfect human beings.
Right.
So we know not to judge because we've all been given grace.
Right.
But yet, why is it hard for us to be in, relationships with one another that are not, that don't have expectations, that are genuine and that don't, exit when you exit, the church. I don't know. I think it's a sad thing. And it's a difficult thing. It's been a difficult thing for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
You know, I have relationships with a few people, and for, you know, just, you know, the second time we had this conversation, but I just, you know, for me, I'm introverted, I guess, you know, I'm an introvert. So, you know, relationships are awkward and hard sometimes for me to have. But with you, knowing your personality, and like, that's how I know it's real, is when I know you're experiencing it. Because I know what you do to maintain relationships, like in friendships. And so yeah, it's difficult. Yeah. It's difficult. And, you know, and it's unfortunate, because we had some really deep relationships with people to the point where, you know, we were considered family, and they were considered family.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And unfortunately, the relationships of children and stuff like that are affected by the relationship that's no longer had by the adults. You know, and and there's not a good reason for it. Like, there's not an issue. Right. There's not a problem. Right. There's not like there's something that happened that broke the relationship. The only thing that has changed is that we're not there anymore. Right. You know? Yeah.
And it's the weirdest thing, because it's like, why can we hold relationships with our neighbors, with, you know, if they move away, we still are in contact with them, or, you know, but, you know, but for Christians, it's just different. You know what I mean? If or, you know, if we're not within the same church, should I say, right. You know, like you said, the expectations, you can't be yourself sometimes. And so that, you know, so there's these expectations that are put on you that the world doesn't put on you. Yeah. You know what I mean? They allow you to be you. You know what I mean? And so,
yeah. And that's why I think church culture is an issue when it comes to stuff like this. Like, just how we view church, I think, plays a huge part. That, you know, just this system and idea that we gather together with these people, and because we gather together with these people, that these are the relationships that we're supposed to have. And that's my whole thing with like small groups and stuff. I get the intent, but the idea that if I go to a group with 7 people, that I'm going to fall in love with these 7 people and end up sharing my whole life with them. That's not how relationships work. It's just not. Yeah. You know, I may become friends with one of those people, or something like that, but it's just not how relationships work. And I think we're stuck as Christians doing Christianity and not being Christian. And we function with the focus more on activity than we do with abiding. And I think it just puts these unnecessary rules and, you know, and weight and expectations on relationships that aren't there. And then again, church culture, the way, you know, the way it's set up to a large degree, I think works against having long-term relationships unless you are in that community solely. Yeah. You know, every community is its own community, which is another problem when we call things a church. Yeah. It's just it's an issue, you know, when we call a gathering a church, because it's not separate from the one that's down the street. That you don't, there's not a church here and a church here. You see what I'm saying? Right. Like, no, there's a gathering community here and a gathering community there. The church is everywhere. Right. But I think when we construct these walls, it makes people think insular. And like you said, when you're outside of it, then you're no longer thought of. Yeah. You're not thought of as a part of the community. Right. And then again, you know, that's why those relationships leave. And I, you know, honestly, I think unless I was being deceived, unless we were being deceived, I think those relationships were genuine at the time. And I think they were real. The unfortunate part is that because of church and church culture, those things just, you know, they don't exist. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of people who are experiencing that same thing. We get comments about people who are lonely are walking by themselves, who, you know, who left a fellowship and they're like, man, I don't go to this church anymore. And, you know, I don't have anybody. And it's just like, it's the oddest thing to me.
Right.
That a Christian would say because they left a church that they don't have anybody.
Right.
You understand? Like because they left a fellowship community, they don't have anybody.
Right.
So all of my relationships were built around
you being in this
this
environment. Yeah.
That is a sin before God. You know, like that's not community. That's a system.
Yeah.
You know? And unfortunately sometimes the world gets it right.
Yeah.
in terms of like, I just mean in terms of, you know, sometimes it's easier to have relationships with people who don't have expectations for you.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And those are the relationships that become the most fulfilling, even sharing the gospel and the love of God. Because there's no expectations. It's life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think we can learn from that. You know, we need to be the body of Christ instead of trying to do the body of Christ. And we need to experience the gospel fluently versus, you know, trying to live the gospel out. It just needs to be something that we internalize and we walk it out in a very genuine way. And hopefully that affects our relationships. But, you know, anyway, my prayers for people, for you, for those of you, and we've, you know, gotten emails and you know, comments about people who are just walking alone and because, you know, they've left a church and they've left friends because of that. And our prayers are with you, you know, and it's difficult, but we got to engage. We got to find community. May not look like it did before, but there are people out there who want to walk genuinely in fellowship with believers. And so, our prayers are with you. There's some things that I'm thinking about maybe to kind of close that gap. I won't say it now, but to maybe even help with people being able to unite and build some friendships and different things of that sort. So I don't know. We'll see what we can do.
All right.
Any last comments?
Nope.
Friends?
Friends. Friend to the end.
Chucky? Ain't that what he says?
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. Yes. Friends to the end.
Friends to the end. Is that what it is?
Yeah. I know he says, do you want to play? That is, yeah. So.
I'm going to watch that tonight.
Oh my gosh. No.
Right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Church Dropout Podcast. As always, please like, rate, and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast at. You know, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. This was just kind of one of those raw episodes.
Yes, very raw.
Yeah, very raw, which is good. You know, authenticity over perfection for us.
Yeah, that's what I prefer. Anyways, that's just,
yeah.
Oh, never mind.
What you about to say, girl?
Nothing.
Oh my gosh.
Nothing.
I think I know what you was going to say. And then, yeah, it would have been a moment. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. God bless.
Right. Good night.